And welcome, and thank you so much for coming. This is the first CARLA presentation of the academic year, and we're delighted to see so many people joining us today. My name is Kate Paisani, and I work at CARLA. And before I introduce our other panelists today, I just want to alert you to the fact that we have additional talks coming up this semester, and you can see those listed on the slide. So I'm joined today by three of my colleagues from the University of Minnesota: Lauren Goodspeed, who's in the Department of French and Italian; Mandy Menke, who's in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies; and Helena Roof, who is in the Department of German, Nordic, Slavic, and Dutch. And we're going to be talking to you today about templates that we have been developing to guide teachers to plan instruction that includes social justice in the language classroom. The templates referenced in the title are part of a larger social justice project that is currently underway at CARLA. And here you can see the homepage for the project. If you go to this homepage, you're not going to find a lot of information because the project just got started in October of 2020. This is a 3-year project that we are calling Social Skills. And you can see that this is an acronym. So Social Skills stands for social justice in language education, strengthening career competencies, intercultural understanding, and language proficiency through specialized materials. The project arose out of the rapidly growing interest in our field in social and racial justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and critical and culturally responsive pedagogies. Although social justice is currently a hot topic in our profession, there still remains an important need for professional development materials to support teachers in learning about and enacting social justice education in language programs. So to meet that need, the 4 of us that are on the panel today applied for and were awarded a 3-year grant from the International Research and Studies Program of the U.S. Department of Education. And the grant's objectives are listed here on the slide, and I'll just read through them. So our aim is to develop students' oral and written language proficiency and prepare them to communicate in personal, academic, and professional contexts, to encourage complex intercultural understanding of social justice topics and how they are addressed through languages and across cultures, and finally, to foster the core career competencies of critical thinking, creative problem solving, ethical reasoning and decision making, and engagement with diversity. So to meet these objectives, we are creating a suite of materials to support teachers in enacting social justice in language education. So you see here on the slide a list of the project deliverables. The first thing on the list is what we'll be talking about in today's presentation, and that is planning templates to support the creation of lesson plans, summative assessments, and curricular units that integrate social justice, multiliteracies, and career readiness frameworks. I'll talk about those frameworks in just a moment. We're also working with curriculum developers to create curricular units in 9 languages for intermediate level learners. We're creating a bibliography of scholarly and practical resources, a searchable database of target language texts that address social justice topics from the cultures where the project's languages are spoken. And we'll also be creating 2 webinars, one to orient teachers and teacher educators to the planning templates that we'll be talking about today, and one that will explain how the curricular units that are being developed can be used in intermediate level language courses. So before we start talking about the templates themselves, we want to quickly explain the 3 frameworks that are undergirding the work that we've been doing. So the first of these frameworks is the multiliteracies framework. And the aim of this framework is to prepare students to engage in personal, academic, and workplace life. And that's done through prioritizing the interpretation and creation of target language texts, the ability to connect language forms to the meanings that they express, and the ability to analyze cultural products, practices, and perspectives. 4 key concepts that we are drawing from this framework are part of the knowledge processes framework that comprises the pedagogical component of the multiliteracies framework. So these concepts are experiencing a text through basic comprehension and expression of thoughts and opinions, conceptualizing form-meaning relationships expressed in a text, analyzing the sociocultural messages in a text, and applying knowledge learned from a text. The second framework that we're working with comes from the social justice literature. So the aim of this research and these frameworks is to challenge, confront, and disrupt misconceptions, untruths, and stereotypes. This language comes from Sonia Nieto's work. Another aim is to draw on the unique talents and strengths that students bring to language classes and to provide resources for them that will maximize their learning. And a final aim is to prompt critical thinking and agency for social change. So we're drawing on two specific frameworks for this. One is Hackman's model for social justice education, and the concepts that we are drawing on are content mastery, personal reflection, critical thinking and analysis, and action and social change. And then we're also drawing from the Learning for Justice framework, and that includes standards for identity, diversity, justice, and action. And the final framework that is undergirding our work is the career readiness framework that was developed by the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota. And the aim of this framework is to develop 10 core career competencies applicable to personal, academic, and workplace life, and to integrate these competencies into liberal arts courses. We are focusing on 4 of these core career competencies. Those include critical thinking, creative problem solving, ethical reasoning and decision-making, and engagement with diversity. And just by looking at this slide, you can see that there are some affinities across these 3 frameworks. And Mandy, I'm going to pass things over to Mandy, who's going to kind of talk about the process that we went through for integrating these frameworks into the creation of curricular unit templates.
Thanks, Kate. So to pick up right where Kate left off, I'm going to talk through our process of how we went about creating the templates. And as she mentioned, we brought together various theoretical frameworks, and each of those frameworks offers a lens through which different skills or competencies are brought into focus. All of the frameworks, however, share commonalities. They all seek to develop students' ability to think critically, communicate clearly, and address complex social issues. But we know that keeping 4 frameworks in focus at any one time can be overwhelming. And so our first task as the project team was to think through how we can embed these frameworks into this planning template for those individuals who would be designing and implementing social justice language curriculum. And so our first step was to identify those affinities or points of intersection between the various project frameworks. We then examined and adapted existing lesson plan templates to meet our needs. We then gathered feedback from social justice consultants. And finally, we are using and piloting the templates with curriculum developers. And I'm going to briefly talk through each step of this process before we share the templates that we've designed with you. So we started, as I said, by identifying where the various frameworks intersected. In other words, what they had in common. And each of us on the grant team approached the task of finding those points of intersection or aligning the frameworks in different ways. Some of us started with the pedagogy, started with multiliteracies, and others started with the content, such as the social justice components or the career competencies. Despite our different starting points, the mappings we each made were overwhelmingly the same. And so ultimately, we decided to create a crosswalk based on the pedagogical framework of multiliteracies pedagogy, as this would be what undergirded the instructional sequence that would comprise the lesson plan template. So what we ended up with was a table, or what we call a crosswalk, where we map into one row what isn't lining. And so on this slide, we're now showing you one of those sets of mappings. And what you're seeing are the mappings that align with the knowledge process of conceptualizing. And within languages education, Conceptualizing is the knowledge process in which learners establish form-meaning connections. In other words, they identify the meanings that specific language forms, vocabulary, grammatical structures, phonological features, or textual conventions such as capitalization, organization, imagery, sound effects. So what those different forms or conventions convey and how they contribute to textual meaning. This knowledge process thus develops students tools for critical thinking and analysis, which was one of the 5 social justice components included by Heather Hackman in her model of social justice education. Specifically, students examine how specific language features and conventions reflect different perspectives and how they contribute to oppression or marginalization. When engaged in this type of activity, we are addressing the Identity 2 and Diversity 7 standard that you can see in the 3rd column there on the table. And those are from the Learning for Justice standards. And they're also engaging diversity and developing ethical reasoning career competencies, which you can see in the 4th column. In essence, or in other words, students discover how language can be a tool used to not just communicate neutral messages, but to empower and legitimize some while suppressing or more marginalizing others. They move beyond the literal meaning and consider the larger societal meaning. This mapping process was repeated for each of the 4 knowledge processes of the multiliteracies framework. And by engaging in this mapping, we were able to narrow our focus to those social justice standards and career competencies that aligned with language teaching and learning, particularly at the post-secondary level. The crosswalk then allowed us to quickly see what was developing in unison to be able to highlight this for those designing instruction. So that was stage 1. Step 2, or stage 2, was to look at what frameworks or templates were already out there to help individuals plan for instruction within the multiliteracies framework or within social justice education. So we looked at existing lesson plan templates within multiliteracies pedagogy, when we drew on 4 templates that came out of the Paisani, Allen, and Dupuy 2016 text, each of which incorporated a series of steps for teaching a specific communicative mode or type of content. And we also looked at the unit and lesson plan templates from Glynn, Wesley, and Wassell 2018, a book specific to teaching languages through the lens of social justice. Each of the templates we analyzed identified a series of instructional stages for engaging students with texts or social justice content. And one of our big conversations was whether we needed different templates for different instructional foci, or whether we could have one common lesson template that could be used regardless of the focus, the instructional focus. So what we did is we created yet another crosswalk in which we laid out the various stages, looked again for where they were overlapping, what maybe some of the differences were, and thought through what they had in common. Eventually, as a team, we landed upon the idea of one lesson template that could be used for all lessons, regardless of what communicative mode was being targeted. So through our comparison of the existing lesson plan templates, we identified the 7 stages of an instructional sequence that would guide students through engaging with social justice content and texts in the target language, while developing their foreign language literacies and addressing social justice standards and career competencies. We then defined or described each of these stages, articulating what the focus of instruction is for this stage, and highlighting what knowledge processes from the multiliteracies framework and what social justice components from the multiliteracies framework align with that stage. And you'll see this in these 7 stages in greater detail in just a few moments. We started at the lesson level and then moved to a unit overview, which identifies explicitly what essential questions and social justice understandings are developed with throughout the unit, as well as the focal social justice and career competency objectives. In addition, in keeping with backward design, the unit overview includes an outline of the assessment plan. So at this point, after stage 2, we had a draft of templates for the unit plan overview, lesson plans, and an action-oriented assessment. So that brought us to step 3, which was to gather feedback from the social justice consultants on the templates. We didn't request anything specific, but really just inquired as to the clarity of the templates, their ease of use, and how the principles from the theoretical frameworks, particularly social justice, were incorporated. Feedback from the consultants was really pretty positive, and it highlighted, though, a few revisions that would strengthen both the ease of use as well as the fidelity to the social justice models. So we revised the templates in order to have greater consistency in the language that we were using and the terms we were using across the different templates, to really focus in on who our learners were in each unit, keeping them at the center of instruction, and also we developed a more robust reflective component. And the goal of those 3 major revision areas was to center the learners and their varied identities and backgrounds, as well as ensure that standards and competencies were meaningfully addressed and not just boxes that we were checking as we were planning. So then finally, our last stage, step 4, was to use these templates with a group of 5 curriculum developers. And we did this past summer. We introduced the template to them during a workshop, and we also provided them with a sample unit and lesson plan. And then we held a series of group work sessions throughout the summer. And the curriculum developers collaborated with members of the grant team and each other, not only to design their instruction, but also to understand the template and the various frameworks. Each of the curriculum developers will implement their unit that they've developed during this academic year. And based on this process and the feedback that we've received from them, we'll revisit the efficacy of the templates before making them publicly available for use. So I feel like we've given you this big process, and I've teased you with a lot of details about the templates. And so at this point, we're going to share those templates with you and highlight some features. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to show you what they're looking like at this point.
Yeah, so Mandy mentioned principles of backward design. So in the spirit of backward design, starting with the outcomes and moving to how students will demonstrate evidence of those outcomes and how we'll plan for instruction to get to those outcomes, I wanted to start with the unit template, and then later we'll take a look at the lesson template. This unit template includes many familiar principles of a unit plan, but I just want to highlight a couple key components here. The first part that I want to highlight is the student population and relevant student knowledge base section. It's so important, especially in social justice pedagogy, to reflect on who students are and what they know. It's important to developing multicultural group dynamics within the classroom and planning for effective instruction in your particular social context as well. And I want to highlight too that in terms of student knowledge, we're not just thinking about student knowledge in terms of language teaching and learning, but also their awareness and familiarity with issues and questions of social justice in their own communities, as well as in the target language community, in order to frame instruction in a way that makes sense for that particular learning community. Another important component here is the inclusion of essential questions that go along with the unit learning objectives. And part of the rationale for focusing on essential questions is because they allow us to explore big ideas and broad concepts, which align well with both multiliteracies pedagogy and social justice pedagogy. And as you see here in the sort of notes related to the essential questions and the unit learning objectives, we've woven in reflection points and reminders throughout the templates to ensure that objectives and instructional activities reflect principles of multiliteracies and social justice pedagogy, always bringing it back to those key concepts. Getting a little bit more specific, the next section of the template includes a curated list of social justice standards from that crosswalk that Mandy talked about that best align with multiliteracies pedagogy to help instructors think through desired understandings from the 4 different domains of social justice standards, before even thinking about engaging in materials design. The template also includes a list that's very similar to this, focusing on the 4 different career competencies that best align with language education, intercultural competence, and social justice. The next section of the template serves to keep the unit grounded in multiliteracies pedagogy by focusing in on the target language texts that students will explore throughout the unit. The template reflects multiliteracies principles of authentic texts, for example, that are designed for a particular purpose using particular conventions by asking instructors to identify which different genres or text types will be used throughout the unit. It also reflects the principle of multimodality by giving instructors a place to see which modalities are addressed in the focal text, as well as throughout the unit as a whole. It then begins to start making connections between the micro and the macro levels of the texts that will be used throughout the unit by examining both the language forms used in those texts, as well as the social justice and cultural content contained within them. Following the principles of backward design, the unit plan then encourages instructors to think through the evidence that they will gather of student learning. Could you go ahead and click for me, Kate? Thank you, yes. So by thinking through the formative and summative assessments and how they connect to specific learning objectives for the unit. And we also include a space to begin brainstorming this final action-oriented assessment. And this action-oriented assessment is intended to be grounded in real-world or at least realistic scenarios that allow students to apply their knowledge from the entirety of the unit and showcase their understanding of text design and the social justice content of the unit in a project that moves them towards action for change. And the unit assessment plan section that you see here is followed by a space to provide an overview of the individual lessons in the unit with a brief description of each lesson's focus to help instructors get an at-a-glance understanding of the overall arc of the unit. Both the unit template and the lesson template include a very similar reflection checklist at the very end, again, sort of bringing back these reminders and check-in points throughout the templates, including links to further reading for additional professional development if needed. And these reflection checklists are just intended as an opportunity to step back from the minutia and all of the nitty-gritty of the details that goes into unit and lesson planning and look at the bigger picture to evaluate to what extent the principles of multiliteracies, social justice education, and career readiness are really embedded and adequately developed throughout the unit, or in the case of the lesson. So moving on now to the lesson template, it starts in a very similar way to what you just saw in the unit template. It helps instructors create strong links between lesson level objectives and unit level objectives by first looking at what are the lesson objectives, with reminders to go back to the essential questions of the unit, to think through multiliteracies principles and the social justice understandings that are being targeted in the unit. Similar to the unit template, includes those same sorts of checklists for the targeted social justice standards and career competencies to make sure that those are being woven into the lessons as well. And then thinking again about the focal texts of the particular lesson, making even stronger connections between the language forms, the conventions, and the cultural or social justice content contained within those texts. And finally, again, thinking through what are the formative or potentially summative assessments that are connected to this particular lesson. This next part of the template that you're seeing here is really the heart of the lesson plan template, and it's dedicated to the instructional sequence and the instructional activities included in the lesson. And as Mandy mentioned before, it's designed to be modular, including these 7 different stages that Mandy referenced earlier. And as she alluded to, not every stage is required for every lesson, but each stage should be addressed at least once in a unit. So that flexibility allows instructors to focus on the activity types and sort of the thinking processes that are most essential to the objectives of the particular lesson that they are implementing. The stages all include examples of potential activity foci, sort of drawing from that crosswalk of the different multiliteracies lesson templates. So all of these foci are grounded in multiliteracies. For example, what you see here in stage 1, which is preparing to interact with texts, the activities might focus on getting students to activate their background knowledge or prior experiences with a specific idea or the content of a particular text. It might help them make predictions about the text that they're going to read. It might also provide linguistic support that will allow them to interact on a deeper level with the text that they're going to be working with, engaging with in the lesson. We've also woven in checks throughout the lesson template, as I mentioned, to ensure that activities are grounded in multiliteracies pedagogy. So Mandy again alluded to these earlier. We have these suggested knowledge processes that we think align well with that particular stage. Again, links to further reading if needed, and a space to indicate which knowledge process or knowledge processes are being targeted through the specific activities designed for this stage. Similarly, we have the same sorts of supports for the social justice components. Again, identifying the components that are best aligned with this particular stage and a place to check which particular component of social justice education is being targeted through the activities. The last piece of this that you're seeing that I want to talk about a little bit is the space for the day number. And as we were designing this lesson template, something that we struggled with was the overall organizing principle of a lesson. What does a lesson mean? Because I think a lot of us, when we're planning for daily instruction, we think about lessons as an individual class period. However, when we're thinking about a template that would be flexible and usable in different contexts where not everyone has the same class session length, that we might need some way to create flexibility there. So the organizing principle for our lesson template is actually the focal texts and the learning objectives as opposed to a day of instruction. So that's why you see this day number here, and a lesson might take 1, 2, potentially 3 days, or a specific lesson might only take 1 day of class. So it's meant to be a flexible template. So in the previous slide, we saw what that first stage, preparing to interact with text, looks like. And I just want to talk through a little bit the rest of the 7 stages that are included in the template. The second stage is building global comprehension of the main ideas of the text. The third stage is understanding meaningful details of the text, getting a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. The third stage, or the fourth stage, sorry, is making form meaning connections, which Kate talked a little bit about earlier and Mandy did as well. So focusing on how the text uses language and or conventions to express meaning and achieve its purpose. The fifth stage, analyzing and contextualizing textual meaning, is a lot of what Mandy talked about in the conceptualizing crosswalk, just sort of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and engaging in critical thinking to put the text content and meaning into its larger cultural and societal context. The sixth stage is applying knowledge, either demonstrating new knowledge and skills in appropriate or potentially creative ways. And the final stage is summarizing on what was learned and or reflecting on what was learned. And as a reminder, not all 7 stages will necessarily be addressed in every lesson. So this isn't meant to be done. It's really not possible to be done in a single period, a single class session. But the important thing is that students engage in every one of these stages throughout the course of a unit so that they are engaging in different types of thinking to develop different levels of understanding and different skills. And as I mentioned, the lesson plan template ends with a reflection list similar to what you saw at the end of the unit plan, giving instructors a chance to look back at the alignment between lesson activities, lesson objectives, and the inclusion of or the implementation of multiliteracies pedagogy, the inclusion of Hackman's 5 components of social justice education, and the development of the targeted career competencies at the lesson level. So with that a whirlwind tour of the unit and lesson templates, I want to hand it over to Helena now, who's going to talk about what we learned from using these templates with curriculum developers this past summer.
Yes, thank you. So as with any project, we had, of course, the best intentions. And as we have shown here, we're very careful and meticulous in our planning. But as to be expected, when we began using these templates in our work with curriculum developers, we ran into a few issues. First, we envisioned the templates to be flexible and that instructors could pick and choose which stages they needed for a particular lesson. The reality was that the templates were somewhat constraining and did not support instructors who wanted to do things in a different order or to perhaps cycle through the same stages multiple times in one lesson. It wasn't clear to instructors how they could manipulate the template to make it work for them. And this is something that we hope to make clearer in the future. Part of the issue might have stemmed from our decision to create one common template for all modalities that Mandy talked about earlier, as opposed to different templates for different modalities. For example, an interpretive lesson might use different stages than an interpersonal lesson to some extent, or perhaps in a different order. And what we had hoped to gain in consistency across the lesson plans, we may have sacrificed in flexibility or at least in clarity on how to work with the template. Second issue was that some curriculum developers felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of boxes to check and the level of detail needed to complete these templates. This is not how most of us lesson plan on a daily basis. And while it is important to maintain this level of detail so that other instructors can read the lesson plan and know what to do, what text to use, what the objectives of the lesson are, I think this often felt very unnatural or forced when the curriculum developers began. The curriculum developers also commented on the repetitiveness of the templates, having to check multiple boxes for every stage or link materials in multiple places. For example, linking the text in the text overview section at the beginning of the unit and beginning of the lesson plan template, and then having to put it again at the stage in the lesson when the text is actually used. However, with time, this became easier for the curriculum developers, but it was definitely a different sort of exercise to put their lessons into a publishable format, one that could be read and followed by many. The extra work, though, did pay off in that our consultants who gave feedback on the completed units found the units that did carefully lay everything out as suggested much easier to follow. So all of this ties into sort of a third issue that we faced, namely that we wanted to create a way for instructors to check that they were including the basic components of the frameworks we were using, such as multiliteracies and social justice pedagogy, and to ensure that these were all present somewhere in the unit. And we aim to achieve this by using the checkboxes and the reflection checklist at the end of the lesson and unit templates that Lauren showed you. However, this may have resulted in the feeling that social justice pedagogy is a checklist. You do these things and then voila, it's social justice pedagogy. But it is, of course, much, much more than that. And we are still searching for the perfect balance between the need to support instructors and scaffold the lessons, and also being careful, on the other hand, not to come across as saying that social justice pedagogy is a checklist. I can say that some of the most fruitful discussions during the feedback meetings that I had with curriculum developers came from debating just which checkbox should be checked. And I do think it was useful for curriculum developers to have to slow down and think through just what they are doing and why and to what aim. In the future, more explanation and education surrounding the use of the templates may be needed. And that leads us to our fourth and final challenge I wanted to talk about, which was that the fact that just how do we create these templates that are accessible to those instructors who may not have had professional development in the frameworks used, as may be the case with many people in our target audience. And in turn, how do we ensure that these frameworks and pedagogies are enacted in the way that they are intended? We, as Lauren pointed out, we included links to background information and resources for people, but of course it is impossible to know if they will be viewed or used and how these lessons might actually be implemented. And with those thoughts in mind, I will turn it back over to Kate, who will talk a little bit about what we plan to do next and where we want to go from here.
Thanks, Elena. So yeah, I just want to talk about a couple of implications of the project and give you all an idea of what's coming next with the social skills project. So two important implications arise from this project. And one is that we are hoping that these templates and the other materials that we create will be useful for teacher professional development, either through self-study, self-enrichment, for language program directors, for instance, who might want to provide professional development for the instructors teaching in their lower level language programs, for professional learning circles of faculty who are interested in integrating social justice in language education. Secondly, we will be publishing these materials as open educational resources with a Creative Commons license. And as you heard from all of the other presenters, we want these materials to be flexible and adaptable, which is why we're choosing to publish them in this way. We hope that they will be able to be adapted and used at multiple levels with multiple languages and different institutional contexts, be it large public universities like the University of Minnesota, or in a K-12 context, or a private college, and so on and so forth. So we're really hoping for adaptability and flexibility in the final products that we create. In terms of future directions, there's already been some questions from all of you about when these templates are going to be made available. We are aiming to post these on the CARLA website in summer of 2022. As we've already mentioned, the curricular units, or the first set of curricular units, are currently being piloted in classrooms here at the University of Minnesota. Based on the piloting work that we do, we will further refine the templates before we publish them on the CARLA website. We also intend to do professional development in our local context here at the University of Minnesota with instructors teaching in intermediate level language courses. And we're hoping that that local professional development will help inform a broader national dissemination plan where we will be presenting aspects of the project at national conferences, and we'll be giving workshops also to national audiences. In terms of the other resources that we are developing as part of the Social Skills Grant Project, we just wanted to give you an idea of when those will be made available. So these are the ones that I summarized at the start of the talk today. So the bibliography of scholarly and practical resources is currently being developed and revised, and we hope that that will be posted on the CARLA website in this semester in fall of 2021. We are, as I mentioned, currently piloting curricular units in 3 of the project's 9 languages. And once the piloting is completed and those have been revised, they will be uploaded on the CARLA website in summer of 2022. And then for the additional 6 languages in the project, those should be available in the summer of 2023. The database of target language texts that we mentioned should be available in fall of 2023. And then we'll be doing the 2 webinars during the 2022 and 2023 academic year. So I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being here today and for your attention. I see there's been a lot of discussion in the chat, and I also see a lot of questions in the Q&A, which we'll get to in just a moment. But I just want to take a moment to recognize everybody who's been involved in this project up to this point. As you can probably glean from what we've said today, there are a lot of moving parts to this project. So we have a number of curriculum developers who are on the project, several consultants, a grant evaluator, and of course, we always want to thank the CARLA team for their amazing professionalism and support for doing projects like this. You also see on the slide each of our email addresses. If you want to contact us as a group or individually, please feel free to do so, and the URL for the Social Justice Project website. So with that, I will stop sharing screen and I will ask my colleagues to put their video back on so that you can see all of us. And we'll go ahead and start addressing some of the questions that you asked. So I assumed that Amanda's question was going to be really popular among attendees. It received 13 likes. So here it is. She asks, who were the social justice consultants and curriculum developers? And as a team, are we concerned with how top-down the development process is up to this point, and what are plans for bottom-up feedback? So I can go ahead and take a first stab at this, and then maybe my colleagues might want to add on. So yes, the creation of these templates has been fairly top-down, and we have done that because we want to make sure that we are being true to the frameworks that are informing the project. We don't want to misrepresent particularly social justice principles that are commonly talked about in the literature. So the consultants that we used are authors of a very well-known book on social justice and language education, Cassie Glynn and Beth Wassel. And then we also are, so those are sort of the more sort of behind the scenes, top down sort of feedback that we're getting. But as we're piloting, we are also getting feedback from the teachers who are working with the templates, and we are getting feedback from the students as part of our grant evaluation plan. So we are doing some more bottom-up feedback. And then I want to add, this isn't about the templates, but rather about the curricular units that are being developed. We intend to enlist the help of what we're calling sensitivity readers. So we want to have folks who identify as belonging to groups that are traditionally marginalized in language education, have a look at these units to ensure that they're not causing harm, or they may not cause harm to students who also represent these traditionally marginalized groups. And so that we're getting feedback from lots of different perspectives. We also recognize that we are 4 white women who are teaching at a land-grant university on Indigenous land, and that we're all very well educated and come from a position of privilege. So we want to ensure that there are multiple viewpoints that are informing the creation and the revision of these materials before we make them available to a public audience. Does anybody want to jump onto that, or no? We're good. I can't see Lauren, so I'll change my view here.
Good.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the next question is, are there any plans to include a notes for teachers components that will offer tips? Oh, wow, hang on. That will offer tips or suggestions for dealing with potential conflicts or tensions among students that may arise during a particular class, especially in contexts that are frigid or conservative, where a particular topic might be considered taboo, controversial, or risky. The example is gender identity in the context of Turkey, which where you might not be able to have these open discussions. Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? Oh, Lauren, yeah.
Sort of take a stab at this. So I think that's partially why it's so important to think through the background and the context that you're in, and part of the reason why we included that student population piece, because of course we're all working in different contexts and different cultures, and so it's really important to understand what is sort of like the culture and the context that I'm working in, and what can I do in that context and adapt as needed. And then I'll just say another piece that we've sort of been thinking about adding to that section is a piece for teacher identity, because that of course is really important to the way that social justice education is going to be enacted. So I think that sort of relates to that as well, thinking through teacher identity, student identity, and the general cultural context in which we're working.
Yeah, and just to jump on to what Lauren said, we should also mention that we are conducting research right now related to this project. And we're currently looking at teacher identity construction in relation to social justice and language education. And so we're hoping that the findings from that research will help inform further refinement of the materials that we are developing, and also inform the professional development that we hope to do. Yeah, Helena.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the teacher notes that I definitely think that is something that might be there in the future. It's in meeting this summer with the 2 curriculum developers I worked with, they kept wanting to have that sort of notes for teachers section, because they were like, okay, but I want the other people who are doing this, they need to know this, or they need to know this, or they need to have these things. And this is, they were spending so much time thinking about it and all of the possible things and, discussion topics that might come up, or ways that this could branch off, that they wanted a place to include that information. And so I do think that might be something that we can include in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are a number of questions about what the completed templates are going to look like in terms of their delivery format and their adaptability. So are these going to be digital templates with or without interactivity? Will there be a way, I like this question, will there be a way to provide feedback, which is something we haven't talked about, but we should maybe consider. Are there plans to develop materials for novice level students? So, as we said, adaptability and flexibility are two of our sort of watchwords as we're thinking through this. And so we haven't settled quite yet on the Creative Commons license that we will use for the templates. But the idea is that, yes, we want these to be kind of modular and adaptable. So we're still kind of working through the details of how that's actually going to look in the way that we deliver it. But what we envision is making these available as Google Docs that people can copy and then use in a way that is meaningful for them and their particular context. In regards to level, we don't currently have plans to develop curricular units for novice level students, but we do think that the templates can be adapted for use with novice level students, or applied to that particular context. So again, getting back to this flexibility and adaptability that are really important to us in what we're creating.
Kate, can I jump in there too? And I think as we think about expanding this project down the road, right, we're very much still in the throes of the current project and working with the intermediate levels, but that is something that we have talked about, right, is how we would envision using these templates, or how we might need to adapt these templates to use with novice or beginning learners. And then potentially, could we develop, or have others actually develop curricular units for instruction with novice learners. So I think that's a bit down the road, but it is something that is definitely on our radar. And then conversely, also adapting them for more advanced level learners as well.
Okay. So let's see, there's a question here about the piloting process. So Mary Jo is asking, what was our piloting process and how are we evaluating the effectiveness of the templates? Anybody want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think the big way we're evaluating the effectiveness at this point is through the feedback that we're getting from the individuals who are using them to plan their instruction, and then also to deliver or implement that instruction. So I think at this point, that's how we're getting feedback or information or data, so to speak, about the effectiveness of the units or the templates as a whole. As we expand and make these more available, I think that's a really interesting question to think about as we think about how accessible they are to those who aren't working closely with us to use them. Are they really user-friendly, and are they self-sufficient, so to speak? what supports do teachers need in order to be able to use them, if any. I think as well as feedback about how teachers end up using them. Like, what do they do with them? How is it helping their instruction, or how is it changing their instruction? How do they have to adapt the templates? All of that type of feedback will be really helpful for informing it long term. And so that kind of cycles back to the question that somebody asked a bit ago about, with them being OERs, would there be an opportunity for feedback? I think that is something we'd like to build in. We just haven't quite figured out all the mechanics or logistics of doing that at this point yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a follow-up question to the one that we addressed earlier from Amanda about the top-down versus bottom-up approach that we have been taking with this project. And this is a comment from the chat. Thanks, Amanda, for putting this in the Q&A so we could address it. So this is from Carolyn, and they say, with all due respect, this process sounds like the sensitivity readers and the feedback from social justice experts participate in tokenist ways. I look forward to meaningful integration of these voices in the future. So thank you for that comment, Carolyn. This is something that we've been grappling with, particularly in relation to the sensitivity readers, because we don't want to tokenize people. We don't want to say, hey, person who belongs to this group, read this and tell us what you think. And so this is something we have spent a lot of time talking about. Let me just stop there, and maybe Lauren, Mandy, or Helena can jump in, because we've had multiple conversations about this.
Yeah, and multiple conversations, I will say, not just among ourselves, but we met with different individuals here at this institution working, for example, people from the Office of Equity and Diversity and other places, just kind of get around, because this was actually an issue that was raised by one of our very own curriculum developers, and how to bring in other voices in a way. So they wanted to have more feedback from other and hear other voices, which we thought was very important. And then our concern was, how do we do that in a way that wasn't tokenist? And then we met with a number of people, and that's actually where this idea of the sensitivity readers came from initially, was a suggestion that we then followed up on, and we plan to do. But we've also talked about getting feedback from various student groups around the institution, and that might be something that we look into in the future, for this project is ongoing. So I think we aren't done getting feedback on them, and that's something that we have, as Kate said, spent a lot of time thinking about, and are still, I would say, grappling with exactly what we're doing. And maybe Lauren or Mandy want to add something.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit that, and it sort of relates to another question that I see in the Q&A about how the consultants and the curriculum developers were chosen. So through some of these conversations, one thing that has sort of come up is the pipeline to becoming a foreign language educator. And especially in our context, we're all teaching these major languages that are taught at universities, these in fact colonialist languages, and just sort of like, what is the pipeline and how do we ensure more diversity overall within the field, which is of course out of the scope of this particular project, but I think it's a really important question to ask and continue thinking about. So I can certainly appreciate that it may feel tokenist, but that is certainly not our intention. And we are trying to find ways to integrate these voices meaningfully, and continue thinking about sort of that overall pipeline.
Yeah, and there's a related question from Nalan, I hope I'm saying your name properly, who says, in terms of identity, who are the imagined target students and instructors in the project? So, for the templates that we're developing, we imagine that they can be for anybody. So they really are, this is why we're working so hard to integrate these features of frameworks that already exist for supporting social justice in language education and critical pedagogies, such as the multiliteracies framework, so that they can be adaptable for different students and teachers. And that's why we have, as Lauren pointed out, that section in the lesson plan, or either the unit template or the lesson plan template, that encourages teachers to really identify where their students are coming from. and what they're bringing to the table in terms of not just their language proficiency, but also their background knowledge and experiences. And this idea of also potentially working in something for teachers to think about their own identity and their positionality in relation to what they're teaching. So we do think that these are hopefully broad enough for this general audience. That said, the units that are being created are specific to our local context, because most of the curriculum unit developers are from the University of Minnesota. They are course supervisors in various languages that are offered at the University of Minnesota. So those are necessarily going to be context specific, but can then be adapted to meet the needs of different teachers and different learners in different contexts. I know that there's several other questions. We are coming up on the top of the hour, so we want to be respectful of your time. We know that many of you probably have to leave. The additional questions that I can answer really quickly are that we, of course, are not able to represent all languages in the curricular units that are being created. We feel that the templates can be adaptable to all languages. We're limited by what we have available in our resources here. We are looking to expand this project in the future to include additional languages. So keep an eye out for that. There's more in the pipeline. And I really appreciate the sign language question. And that is something that we've already started talking about at CARLA. And I think it's something that our group needs to talk about. So I don't have an answer for that one, but it is something that is definitely on our radar. So we want to thank you all for coming today and for spending this hour with us. We hope that we will see you at another CARLA talk in the future, and we look forward to disseminating these materials that we're talking about and hopefully for you using them. So thank you all for your great questions and your comments in the chat. Have a great day.